I just completed watching Go Go Loser Ranger, and here are all my thoughts on the show. The plot centers on a minion called Fighter D, who fights an analog to Super Sentai in this world of Dragon Keepers, where the Dragon Keepers have powers of gods within their weapons. The goal of Fighter D is to essentially defeat and kill all of the members of the Dragon Keeper team, as they completely killed all of their boss monsters, who were essentially the overlords for the fighters, as all the fighters are named from A to Z, and it's revealed later on that there's also an underground fighters group, as the show follows this sort of plot, where Fighter D takes the disguise of Sakurama Hibiki, as he essentially takes his place within this world of the Dragon Keepers as being a member of the task force, whose job is to keep the safety of everyone in Japan, as they make a show every Sunday, kind of reminiscent of how Super Sentai is aired every Sunday with Kamen Rider. My impressions of the first episode was amazing. I was surprised of the level of detail in the character designs and the overall style and aesthetic for the characters. The characters didn't really feel like over-processed as compared to other shows like I've mentioned before with Studio Mappa, but the show falls in a nice balance between highly rendered characters with overall simplistic character rendering with all the characters within the show. There's some use of 3D animation here and there, but overall it's fine for the type of show that it is. I also enjoyed the twist of how at the end of the episode, Suzukiri essentially found out the identity of Fighter D, and essentially starts using Fighter D as a pawn for her own schemes with the Dragon Keepers, as to take out all the Dragon Keepers, although we don't necessarily know what ends she is getting at with using Fighter D. With the show's first arc largely focusing on Fighter D essentially getting the Dragon Keeper weapon for Dragon Keeper Red, with at the end of its first arc coming out that, Fighter D was successful in this effort, and essentially all the Dragon Keepers have to essentially scramble as to plan out what to do with this current situation. Some highlights that comes along when the show is whenever Fighter D switches positions with Sakurama, as Sakurama in his past doesn't necessarily follow the beliefs of the Dragon Keepers, as he grew up in a household where his parents kind of always demonized and always were skeptical of the Dragon Keepers since the invasion of the monsters within the series. Although what happens with Sakurama is that early in his life, his parents were killed by a boss monster, including his sister getting injured in that event, with Hibiki essentially taking up the task of becoming a Dragon Keeper because he, kind of went against his parents and was a massive fan of the Dragon Keepers up until this event. Until it's shown later on that turns out that Hibiki's sister is actually Dragon Keeper Pink. But with Fighter D's situation at hand, essentially what goes on is that after the events of the first arc, Fighter D essentially makes an effort as to get the activation piece that activates Dragon Keeper Red's weapon, and where he uses Sakurama as to essentially take his own place as he pretends to be Fighter D in this whole ordeal as to get that activation piece. Until which point, Fighter D essentially just takes Sakurama's place in the whole training as to become a Dragon Keeper, and Sakurama is just left essentially in the position of Fighter D until I believe he is shown at the end of the show's first season, as Fighter D essentially goes on a training arc. This is where Fighter D meets up with Fighter X, where at this point I thought that, in which I'll explain later on with my feelings on her, as then it turns out that in this base with Sakurama, turns out that a boss monster appears. But to take a moment back from the show, I'd like to comment on the show's inspirations, as the series is clearly inspired by the history of Tokusatsu, with the clear inspiration of the fighters clearly being modeled after the evil minions of Shocker from Kamen Rider, as while the Dragon Keepers serve as an analog for Super Sentai / Power Rangers team, the Dragon Keepers' overall design are largely inspired by Tatsunoko Productions' scientific ninja team Gatchaman, as with the designs of their helmets and also the Dragon Keeper's capes, with the overall idea that the society is governed by the Dragon Keepers, something that I saw with Power Rangers SPD in the States, and I assume is a concept that is derived from the Japanese series sets adapting Deca Ranger, as with the idea of the Dragon Keeper, or handpicked by their leader, Dragon Keeper Red, is similar to how all Rangers, all Red, also hand-selected every member of a special task force in that series. But as a get back, then with the arc with Fighter X, whom I assume was called Fighter 20, because of the notion of Roman numerals that I know, and the whole thing with the boss monster where Fighter D and his cadet friends need to take out the boss monster on their own, single-handedly, as this brings everything from all the drama and stakes that were set up all throughout the series. And then the battle between Dragon Keeper Blue with the boss monster, with Dragon Keeper Blue's whole emotional backstory that honestly got me at first, until I remember the trope of revealing a character's backstory right before the character dies, which kinda took me out of the show, but the overall idea of Dragon Keeper Blue's backstory, I came out of it with the sentiment that he became my favorite character in the show. And I would enjoy the idea of a potential spin-off manga miniseries where we follow Keeper Blues and his own insights with him being a Dragon Keeper and his whole role in Japanese society, with the role in keeping up a thin veil of sweet protection for everyone in Japan. But to get back, the twist in the final battle between Fighter D and Dragon Keeper Blue, and then when the boss monster takes out Blue. At that moment, I almost wanted Fighter D as to take up Dragon Keeper Blue's position within the Dragon Keepers team, as he's forced to take out Dragon Fighter X, whom, if you watch the series, he has a close connection with. But that's not what the series is attempting to do, as the series closes out on Fighter D and a squadron of recruit friends looking after his injured friend whom was injured by the boss monster early in the arc, as Dragon Keeper Red knows that there is a traitor among the ranks, as Suzukiri implicates Tokita in her whole scheme as she wants to take down the Dragon Keepers. And I have to say this, Suzukiri is such a bad bitch. Oh my god, I want her to take me out back. I want her to use me as a little boy. The manga series for Go-Go Loser Ranger is by Dengi Haruba, whose previous known work is on Quintessential Quintuplets, a series that I haven't really heard much from aside from people praising the series. And as I saw promotion for the anime film adaptation when it came out, around the same time Evangelion 3.0 was released in theaters in the States, back in 2022. Overall, I loved the show's OP and ED that got me hyped every week watching the series on Hulu as it came out. And I'm so glad that the show's second season has already been greenlit, because I want to see more from Suzukiri and her schemes in the series. And knowing the announcement that the series is being adapted to a live-action Tokusatsu series has me all excited to see what is to come from this amazing franchise, penned by the same man who made Quintessential Quintuplets. This has been Osoweeb, and I'll be signing out.